long video here, so kind of settle back, grab some coffee, come back. We've got a whole lot to cover here. So what we're going to talk about is the new features in SQL 2012 that are of interest to DBAs. However, I'm not going to be able to cover them all. There are way too many. We're going to talk about a quick mention of several of these. However, we're not going to cover all of them until we get to those specific spots in the actual course, okay? And some of the things that are new in SQL 2012, we won't cover it all because we covered those in 170. Okay, so we're not talking about the Transact SQL new features or analysis services new features or reporting services or integration services. This is really all about the database engine. Okay? So I think that the DBAs have possibly the most to be excited about in SQL Server 2012. So SQL Server 2008 R2 had a lot for the business intelligence folks, but it seems like 2012 has so many new features for the DBAs. I'm not sure that we quite win the new features war, but I think that there's just so much that there's a lot, okay? I do have a link. Get the PDF of this video, pull this up, and you can see a link of Microsoft that lists to all the new features. I've picked out about 15, and that's what this video is, that will walk you through what my favorite new features are, the things that I thought were worthy of highlighting to a group of peer DBAs like you. So feature number one, one of the things that I'm most excited about is server core support. Okay, so all editions of SQL 2012 can now be installed on the server core editions of Windows. So are you familiar with server core? Some people are not. I'm not sure how much you know about that. The server core editions of Windows, these are the server editions. Okay, so Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2012, Server Core Edition, okay? They have no GUI. Okay? So there is no desktop. Okay? There's no GUI component whatsoever. You put them in a rack and you manage them all remotely. So you can do this remote admin via PowerShell or command prompt, remote desktop. Okay? None of these, they don't come with a GUI. Now the advantage, so you might be saying, why would I want to install an operating system that has no GUI? Well, the advantage is there are fewer patches and reboots because we don't have to install the latest version of Internet Explorer on the server and then patch it incessantly. And then, oh yeah, by the way, we need a reboot to patch your Internet Explorer on your server that you're never using, right? So we don't have GDI Plus and all these other things that are found on desktop systems. So fewer patches and fewer reboots means that server core editions are a real winner for you from an admin perspective. Okay. Now this is only going to be on servers that are Windows Server 2008 and higher. Okay. And there's a nice little Microsoft walkthrough information that I have linked in the PDF about installing SQL Server 2012 on Server Core. Okay. Now Server Core is not going to be the full-blown SQL Server. There is no reporting services, no master data services, no data quality services if those are important to you. Again, remote management only, so you will have to install your management tools, your SQL Server management tools on a remote system and then connect up. Performance-wise, it's going to be the same. Okay. Let's see, feature number two that I picked out, and I really didn't pick these out in any particular number. So like this isn't my second favorite feature or anything like that. You don't have to take your tables or indexes offline as frequently in SQL Server 2012. So do you know what LOBs are? Large objects. So we call them LOBs, large object data. This is going to be your varchar max, your nvarchar max, your var binary max, and your XML data types. Okay, these are, you can store up to a whole lot in a single row with these. But now, if you have an index with LOB data, you can manage it online. You can rebuild it, reorganize it. Okay, you no longer have to take the table offline or the index offline to perform index management. So that's a big benefit, I think. Another thing I like is that I had to do this about 2 weeks ago. When you add a new column to a table and you want to simply have that column be bound with default values, you don't actually have to lock the table for the duration. Okay, this happened to me because I had a web analytics package that I wanted to add a new column with a new default in. And this was a table that probably had 30 million rows, 40 million rows, somewhere in that range. And if I had to add a new column in an old version of SQL Server and then update it with default values, it might have taken 20 minutes. Meaning that would pretty much take that table offline. Nobody could use it until I was finished with my operation. Now, this is effectively just a metadata operation. The changes are made, and then whoop, it simply swaps out the page metadata in memory, and the new column is added. So we don't have to take tables offline or have extended exclusive locks on a table in SQL Server 2012 to do that sort of thing. Okay. One of the new things you might have heard of already is called FileTables. This is pretty interesting. What we're talking about here is having to store files in conjunction with your SQL Server data. And this happens all of the time, say a surveillance system. Automatic system, you have a database that says this is the file and it was recorded at this time. And then you even have maybe some analytics package that watch that video or will mark in there, these are the significant events in that particular video. We still have to store that video file in some way, in addition to the metadata. So traditionally, we've had two different ways to do this. We can store the file in the operating system somewhere, and then we can have a pointer to that file in the database that says, hey, when you want to look at this video, you need to go down to the C drive and go in the videos folder. Okay. The other way of doing it was to actually stream it into the SQL Server column. And there was a lot of overhead, associated with doing that. Okay. Well, today we have FileTables. And FileTables are an interesting blend of a technology that came out in SQL Server 2008 called FileStream. And what we're talking about is somewhat of a blend of the two storage techniques. You have a file table, which is a table of files. You add a row to this table, and that is going to be treated like a folder in Windows. Okay? So it's pretty interesting. The files can be added and removed by simply accessing the folder file stream. And this is kind of beyond us right here, but you have a share. FileStream makes available a share that to Windows Explorer, to Windows API, to everything else just looks like a regular folder. And you simply have your files and folders in this folder, and they get accessed. They get accessed. You can write to those files. You can add new files, and they automatically get added to your SQL Server. Okay, so it's a pretty interesting idea. Number 4 would be what are called partially contained databases. So this is simply a SQL Server database that is partially contained, meaning that it does not have dependencies on the other system databases in the SQL Server like your traditional database would. Okay, so we say it's isolated from the rest of the instance. Okay, the metadata that the database needs is stored in the database. And that's unusual because in most of our databases, the metadata would be stored in the master, or maybe some would be in the model database when we start it up, or would be in the MSDB database. We'd have some additional information, or in the resource database. Not so with our partially contained databases here. Okay? Now, another interesting thing, we do not have to log into SQL Server authentication to access partially contained databases. They have their own authentication. And we will see some of working with these later on. I think it's chapter 4 or 5. It's one of those two when we talk about databases, and we'll see. And so I can imagine you asking, why would I do this? This is neat, but it's so not SQL Server. Makes it really easy to move a database to a new location without breaking functionality. Right? If you've ever had to move a database and try to match user SIDs and just a nightmare, this makes it so much easier. Okay, so we will talk about partially contained databases in 2 sections. One in chapter, I think it's 5, when we talk about creating databases, and then later I think it's chapter 14 where we talk about moving and copying databases. Okay. So, feature number 5. This is not necessarily a new feature, but it is a change, new functionality maybe. SQL Server Audit, we will see a little bit later, I think in chapter 16. And this is now available in all editions. Okay? It used to be only available for the enterprise previously. The only gotcha is that you can only audit at the server level unless you're at enterprise. Okay? So you can't do database level auditing. SQL 2014 is no real different. But the server auditing does give you some good info. You can do all the backup commands, all the restore commands, logins, logouts, DBCC commands. Do you know what GDR is? That would be your grant, deny, and revoke. Okay, so even though we're not able to get down to the database level, we can actually see when an administrator or someone issues a grant, a deny, or a revoke command within a database. Okay, and there are a lot more. I just kind of ran out of space to list them. Definitely one of my favorite features for SQL Server 2012 are ColumnStore Indexes. This is one of those that gets a lot of the headlines. So when people start talking about, oh, why would you go to SQL 2012 instead of 2008 R2? This is one of those killer features. This is a new type of index that simply makes it faster to query relational OLAP data. We don't really have the time and space to really go into it in this particular course here. But basically, being able to query your relational OLAP. Notice I didn't say OLTP or multidimensional OLAP. Okay? This is your data warehouses that are stored in your relational database engine. Okay? But if we are able to faster query that relational data warehouse, that means we probably don't have to move to analysis services yet. So in other words, if I have a query that takes 2 hours to run today, but I install SQL Server 2012, move my database over, and configure it to use ColumnStore Indexes, now that query runs in 2 minutes, maybe that kind of removes a lot of the pressure on me that says, hey, you need to install analysis services and build a data warehouse and all the things that go along with that. Okay? So it's a much faster querying technique, and it's less hardware will be required to answer those massive queries. Okay? Your maintenance windows might be a little shorter as well because it's faster querying. Okay? We can do lookups faster and so forth. The Database Recovery Advisor is, I put this in here. This is kind of, again, that maybe not a new feature, but it has a name now. I don't remember it ever having a name before. And we've been given a more graphical component. So we'll talk about it later. It's kind of an evolution of what the old Enterprise Manager did that then became the Management Studio. Basically, when you go to restore a database, in the past, it would show you a suggested restore this first, then restore that first, but it would be in a grid. It would be in a list. Well, now you get a visual timeline. Yay. Okay? We'll see it. I'm obligated to show it to you. It's a big part of the GUI there. Probably my favorite feature other than AlwaysOn would be user-defined server roles. This is the ability to group together logins and apply permissions at the login level. Okay? We'll see that in chapter 5 or 6, whatever our security chapter is. Okay? Let's see, number 9 would be multi-subnet clustering. So no longer are you limited to being in the same rack on the same subnet with your cluster. You can actually cross racks, cross routers. Okay. Talk about more of that in course 172, the HADR. Let's see, another enhancement or evolution thing. We have more partitions. We'll talk about partitions in chapter 10. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead. We have 15,000 partitions is the new default limit. Okay. I think everybody's killer feature is AlwaysOn availability groups. Okay? So this is everybody's favorite feature of SQL 2012. This is the reason you buy SQL Server 2012 instead of SQL Server 2008 R2. Okay? It's so that you can have access to the AlwaysOn availability groups. Okay? It's both a high availability and disaster recovery solution. Okay? Whereas in the previous, well, we'll see here. It's like clustering at the database level here, so with database mirroring and log shipping all in one. Okay? and I guess it's not a new feature, but a deprecated feature, is database mirroring. Okay. We'll talk more about that in 172. But this is just a table that kind of picks out a couple of differences between AlwaysOn and database mirroring. Notice with database mirroring, you were limited at failover of one database at a time. Now in AlwaysOn, I can group together a whole bunch of databases and fail over the entire group. Okay? We can actually read from those secondary databases. We can have multiple secondaries now. With Service Pack 1 in SQL Server 2012, we have even 8 secondaries we can work with. But does require a Windows failover cluster, whereas mirroring did not. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Let's just randomly run through a bunch of these. There are some pretty good enhancements to the Transact SQL debugger, and we cover that more in the Transact SQL class, course 177. You do have page-level restores are now shown up in Management Studio. They are not new in 2012, but it's new that you can see them in Management Studio. We do have a new concept called distributed replay, and so we have the distributed replay controller, and it's the ability to replay profiles on multiple servers. So, Resource Governor has some additional evolutions, additional new features as well. And the Database Engine Tuning Advisor, if you use that, as we'll talk about in Chapter 10, has now query plan cache that it can use. So you don't have to predefine a workload for it.